At Intuit, we believe you cannot have prosperity without equality. Women and people of color should not be paid less than men for the same work. 3 years ago, we made a commitment to reach and maintain pay equity for our employees. But pay equity is an ongoing process, and all companies must join this fight. Like the 19th Amendment, we are not done.
Well, hello, everyone. I am so happy to be sitting down with Françoise Brougher. As I mentioned, Françoise has an amazing history of executive positions across Silicon Valley companies, most recently as the COO of Pinterest, the former head of business at Square, and leading a key part of the ad business at Google. So, Françoise, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
And I think one of the many reasons we wanted to have Françoise here, but several weeks ago, she really, I think, stirred up a very important conversation in Silicon Valley around gender discrimination. Françoise, you took the step of suing your former employer, Pinterest, for gender discrimination and writing a really powerful Medium post outlining your experience at the company. Why don't we start there? Tell us a little bit why you decided to speak out and take legal action. And, I'm excited to kind of hear what sort of feedback you've gotten as well.
Yeah, so I should backtrack a little bit. I was hired at Pinterest now 2.5 years ago, and I was extremely excited to join Pinterest. It was consumer internet, which I know. It was ad, which I had experience at Google. And Pinterest was this magic property. Most of the audience was female. That's still a long way to go. I saw it as a really perfect opportunity to bring my leadership skill to the executive level and with this team. But from the very beginning, I started noticing some crack in the company culture. And this started with very small microaggression toward me as a woman. Like I explained in my blog post, I'm not invited to the meeting after the meeting. And then, I prepare quite hard for the roadshow, and then I'm no longer on the roadshow. Or I get invited from strategy meeting. And then at the end, when I started just pointing out this issue, I just got fired. So that's the first time really in my career that I recognized that I was being treated differently because of my gender. So at the end of the day, I bring this case for really two reasons. One is I want Pinterest, of course, to be accountable for discrimination and retaliation against me. And I see it as an opportunity to help use my voice to stand up for all women who face this type of struggle in the workplace, especially in Silicon Valley, tech company. And a lot of them are not speaking because, especially if you're earlier in your career, you have this fear of retaliation. And I try to resolve this issue within the company before I actually went public. But the issue will not be addressed. So my last, resources were I had to go public. And sometimes it just makes me realize sometimes you need some pressure for things to change. And I'm recognizing that I'm a really unique position to use my voice and advocate for change. So that's why I did it. It's pretty simple. I think if someone like me doesn't do it, no one will. And I want to use this opportunity. Yeah, you want to add? Yeah, go ahead.
I know I strung like 4 questions in there. So
yes, that's why I'm just.
But I want to ask. I think there's so many women listening to this who can probably relate to things that you're talking about.
Yeah.
The meeting after the meeting, or some sense that something's wrong, and I'm just curious if there was more behind sort of your realization, and I don't want to say awakening, maybe is a strong word, but what kind of brought you, because I think so many people feel this in you end up in a lawsuit in some ways, and so I'm just wondering if you can bring us more inside how, what that was like to finally feel like, wait, something is off. Because I think I ask because I think people can sort of relate, but they're trying to kind of calibrate, right, what action to take.
Yeah, and I think, and actually, you know me a little bit. I'm generally a very private person. I really not looking for this kind of opportunity. Even so, right now I'm very thankful. So don't mistake the intent there. But I always have been on the motto: do a good work, and you will be rewarded. And I live with this mantra. And yeah, sometimes you're in a meeting, you say, okay, that's not really okay, but to let it slip because I was really aiming for being able to bring change from the inside and be a very good role model. This is what I always strive for in my career everywhere I've been. So you let it slip and you say, okay, fine. And most of the time it's actually fine. But at Pinterest, what was very troubling was the systematic gender bias and discrimination. And this, it's actually, you start seeing it, and you may not see it the first week you are in the office or the first month you are in the office, but especially toward the end, when you start looking back and you say, oh, I should have seen this a long time before. So the realization really came a little bit after the fact when you start putting all the pieces together. So said, my last event at Pinterest, it was very clear. The only reason I was recognizing was my gender. And then when I stopped complaining to my manager and to HR, I got fired. So that there was no longer any ambiguity of what was happening there.
Have you heard from Ben Silberman, the CEO, after filing the suit?
No, I haven't. I think when you are in litigation, it's more difficult to do.
Yeah, fair enough. Mm-hmm. So what has the reaction been?
Yeah, so the reaction has been overwhelming. I never expected this. I think right now my Medium post has 160,000 views, which when I wrote it, never expected it whatsoever. But the things that, more than the metrics, the things that really resonated to me is the word that are coming over and over and over again. This is too familiar. In all the message I have received, everyone tell me this sound all too familiar. They had a similar experience. And I have been really overwhelmed by women coming that I never worked with, or in very different industry. Even, I'm French, so I also got a message from Europe. People tell me, oh gosh, this happened to me. So it just shows us that it's not something that happened in one company in Silicon Valley, but it can happen everywhere. And we are in 2020, and there is still a lot of progress to be made on this topic. The other response I have, what has been really nice, is people that work with me even 20 years ago have reached out and say, hey, what can I do to help? And they were very concerned for me. They said, look, be careful when you do something like this. We want to make sure we are here to support your credibility, because there is always a risk when you go public that people will try to attack your credibility. So it was nice to hear that I had this support.
Yeah. It's funny to me because just in writing about it or tweeting about it, I'm also receiving a lot of opinions. And I think there's definitely that, oh, this sounds incredibly familiar. Yeah. I also think there is a camp, and this frustrates me, frankly, of people who, maybe she didn't have this experience, or maybe she didn't have that experience, or, people who don't know you, actually. And it's left me, to be a little honest, just sort of a little gloomy about this issue, because it seems like, perhaps even comparing to something like the Me Too movement, right, where we saw, a real awakening and a real sort of change. And my personal belief is that we're overdue for something when it comes to the type of you're talking about. But I'm worried that perhaps, we're not going to get the change we need, because it seems like there's still these camps that, when it comes to, well, performance is subjective, right? Whereas, certain types of sexual harassment might not be, right? But so this is a little more of a statement than a question. But I'm curious if you've detected all of that, and just how you feel we can move forward on this issue when there is a noisy camp that is going to default to,
Yeah. And to be honest, the answer I've received right now will be only positive. And maybe I'm like overly naive and optimistic. But I haven't seen anything that question for people I know, or so I'm not worried. I do worry that I know I'm a little bit a lonely voice right now. And I think it would be better if there were more voice. But the reality is at executive level, there is not so many of us. And what I try to highlight there is discrimination can happen up and down the hierarchy. And it's not because you are at the C-suite that you have a seat at the table, that you actually have a voice at the table. It's very, very different. And this is what I try to highlight, but just by the sheer number of people in this position, there is not so many people that actually had the opportunity to reach this level. And that's what I also really wanted to highlight, that discrimination still exists. It's different from when you are at a lower level, but it's not less damaging.
Yeah. Excellent point. I think and I imagine everyone here has read the post. If they haven't, you should definitely read it. Something that jumped out at me was not just the gender discrimination, but really a pattern of poor governance in fast growing tech, no longer startups. Obviously, Pinterest is a public company, but, in particular, you talked about the board and how close the board was to the CEO, a comment he made when you asked why there wasn't more debate and discussion in board meetings, because I picked them or something to that effect. Talk a bit about just sort of what you've observed in the companies you've worked at when it's come to sort of governance, and how you think that intersects with this problem.
Yeah, I think board governance, it's a wide topic in the Valley, not just at Pinterest. So I want to broaden a little bit the topic. The experience I had with other company I worked with, where I was much more involved with the board. This I can make a statement very comfortably. I met with people from the board outside the board meeting. I was in all board meetings for the entire board meeting, and there was difficult conversation about strategy and direction we wanted to take. My experience at Pinterest was completely different. I went to the first year. I went to the board meeting just for a section, presented something, and left. So I went 45-minute session. And then I had very little contact with the board. To the credit of the board, I don't know what they know and what they don't know. So it's very difficult to have a judgment on people you actually do not interact with.
And I think you also mentioned there was no follow-up afterwards.
There were not any follow-up. My understanding right now is the board, and I think it's public. I think Ben has been public about it, so I'm happy to share. I think they have now a special committee that have hired an external firm to do a review of the culture.
Yeah. Yes.
So
cultural reviews happening in some.
Yes. So for whatever it means.
Yeah. But I hope. I mean, I'm glad you sort of put a spotlight on the governance as well, because I think it's just these things are very related, and we continue to have companies that started as, a founder and their two investors, right, as the board, and that have obviously the boards have grown, but I think it's a real something that just deserves more scrutiny. So.
Yeah, and I can tell you, I have been a board member of Sodexo for the last 9 years now, and I'm definitely much more engaged with the management that I ever seen happened to me at Pinterest. I'm on the other side, so I do understand the responsibility you have as a board member.
Sort of, you told me that one of the parts of your post that was most important to you was the advice you gave.
Yes.
Walk us through some of that.
Yes. So there are 8 of them. So I'm not going to go through the 8 of them. One that is very important for people to understand is, and I have seen in the Valley for the last 10 years, people focus on hiring and recruiting. And it's kind of a badge of honor when you can actually bring women or people of an underrepresented minority to your company. But it's often really stopped short. And I saw it at Pinterest, is you bring these people in, but there is no effort to actually retain them, making sure they grow. There is no transparency on data, like what are the promotion, what are the retention of this category. And therefore, when you don't measure it, you actually don't take action. I do think company also focus a lot of cultural fit and not culture add. And that's very important that this change happen. When people talk about culture, I always say, look, culture should not be the reason why you actually reject people that do not look like you, do not speak like you, do not behave like you. You really have to focus on the idea. And it's really hard to get this change happen.
Yeah. I think that's something we need to keep in mind, as well as, the Valley has a number of diversity recruiting initiatives across race, across other things. And, it's sort of putting into a leaky bucket, right? If
yes.
Not more. So I think that's an important one.
Yeah.
I know we're not going to get into the specifics of the lawsuit because that's,
I can't.
But I wonder just what you're sort of preparing for in terms of I guess I'll say fight ahead. We've seen in the Valley, Ellen Powell's discrimination case against Kleiner Perkins. It was in the headlines, and I'm just curious what you're sort of preparing for with that.
Yeah, so I recognize it's not going to be easy. That's going to be hard, and not so much driven by the process, but you have to relieve all of this. And in many ways, you want to put this behind you, selfishly. But at the same time, again, I feel like if I don't pick this fight, no one will. So I'm in a position I can do it. I know it's going to be hard, and I'm ready.
I want to circle back to, because I think, again, we talked about some of what you experienced, but talk a little bit more about what you were doing internally. You talk about this in your blog post, but in terms of trying to bring to light some of these issues, and I think there are many people in the room who maybe have raised their voice or advocated for themselves, and maybe some of what you've what you were doing in the trenches too, because I know it was quite a bit.
Yeah. So what I was trying to do, and again, I was really trying to change things from the strategy company. So I was trying to bring new ideas, and some of them really have taken hold on Pinterest. So there's a lot of things on the strategy around advertiser diversification, new sales model, metrics, OKR. All of this I did for the company perspective. From the people in the company, I talk a little bit about it in the blog post. I had women coming from me and say, hey, help me. How can I be heard? And what I did, and again, when you look after the fact, you say I probably should have done more. But I try to them work with the system. Let's try to find out a way that you can work with the system, because this is something I have believed all my life, that if you actually do a good job, put yourself forward, the system is going to change and you are going to be able to affect it. But Pinterest culture was too strong and too settled for me to be able to change it. And I realized this after the fact. I brought senior women to the company in very interesting role. I brought a CMO, I brought a head of performance marketing. So I I take women as an organization, integrate in my org and give them senior role, but it's not enough. If the culture is very cemented, it's hard to change it from inside.
It's so many companies hold up their culture as, particularly in the tech world where there's so much competition for talent and a great engineer can get a fancy job anywhere, right? It's sort of this badge of honor, but it's very, very hard to change. And I think, I wrote a column as well about Ben and Pinterest, where it's also this attitude of not wanting to rock the boat too much. It sometimes feels like, and I think that can really, that against a very calcified culture, doesn't get us anywhere. So
yeah. And honestly, again, going back to the board, if you are the board and you have a duty of fiduciary duty once you become public, you need to have the company continue to change and evolve, right?
Absolutely. So what's next? I mean, besides sort of gearing up for...
I think I'm going to be... I'm going to be busy. I don't expect this to be easy. Right now, it's my only focus. I'm very focused on this. I want to get to some form of resolution and impact. And then where it leads me afterward, I will see. Despite the fact that I think I had a really great run in tech and I'm very thankful for it, I was never a planner. So I will see where it's lead me.
Well, Françoise, thank you. And I
thank you.
Turn it over to some questions.
Yeah.